April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. The sky is a burning sea of black smoke and silver contrails. The roar of 100 engines shakes the heavens as formation after formation of American B-17 flying fortresses cut through the icy air, their wings gleaming under the fractured sunlight. Below them, anti-aircraft bursts bloom like black flowers, marking death in the sky. In the lead formation, Lieutenant Clarence E. Bud Anderson grips the cold steel of the control yoke. His gloved hands are slick with sweat despite the freezing air that seeps through the cabin. The engines of his B-17, the All-American, thrum with the deep mechanical rhythm of war. Every vibration, every metallic groan, is a reminder that one mistake, one lucky German shell, could send them all tumbling into oblivion. Bomb bay doors open, the bombardier calls from below, his voice crackling through the intercom. Anderson nods, his jaw tight. He can feel the shift in the aircraft's weight as the doors clatter open beneath him. Ahead, the target, the industrial complex on the outskirts of Bremen, is barely visible through the haze of smoke and tracer fire. "Hold steady, Bud," says his co-pilot, Lieutenant Ralph Burbridge. "We're right on target." But steady is a relative term in a sky filled with death. The B-17 shudders as flak bursts near the left wing, the shock waves slamming through the fuselage. Shards of hot metal rattle against the bomber's skin. One piece punches through the glass of the nose turret, slicing a neat hole an inch from the bombardier's head. "Jesus, they've got our range," someone yells over the intercom. Anderson's voice is calm, disciplined. "Stay focused." Bombs away in 3, 2, 1. The bomber lurches upward as the payload drops. From below, a string of bright, falling dots drifts down. Seconds later, the earth erupts in plumes of fire and debris. Bombs away. Direct hit. For a fleeting moment, there's relief. Mission complete. But it doesn't last. From behind, the call comes, "Fighters." 6 o'clock high. Anderson cranes his neck. Out of the cloud cover, dark shapes dive like predatory hawks. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, their black crosses stark against the gray sky. They streak down through the formation, their 20mm cannons blazing. Tracers cut through the air, orange, screaming lines of death. The tail gunner, Sergeant Sam Tabor, opens up with his twin .50 calories, the vibration rattling the fuselage. They're coming in hot. 3 of M. The B-17 rocks violently. One burst rips through the starboard side, tearing holes the size of fists through the aluminum skin. Hydraulic fluid sprays across the cockpit. Engine 3's hit. Burbridge shouts, checking the dials. Oil pressure dropping fast. Anderson makes the split-second decision. Feather number 3. Keep us level. Another impact, heavier this time. The plane bucks hard to the right. Warning lights flash across the instrument panel. Then, a sound no bomber crew ever forgets, the metallic scream of tearing metal, followed by a gut-wrenching crack. A 20mm cannon shell rips through the rear fuselage, detonating between the radio compartment and the tail. The explosion nearly splits the aircraft in two. The tail section, now dangling by a few twisted beams of aluminum and control cables, begins to sway violently in the slipstream. Tails hit. Tails hit bad. Tabor's voice is panicked, the intercom filled with static and shouting. Burbridge's eyes go wide. "Bud, we're losing the tail. It's hanging on by a thread." Anderson glances back through the cockpit window and feels his stomach drop. The rear of the plane, everything aft of the waist gunners, is barely attached. Torn metal flutters in the freezing wind like shredded cloth. The stabilizer is twisted, half gone. "Hold her steady," he says, more to himself than anyone else. "We're not done yet." The controls feel sluggish, almost dead. The yoke resists every movement. It's like trying to steer a sinking ship with broken rudders. Tail controls are gone. Burbridge reports. We've lost rudder authority completely. Anderson's jaw tightens. He knows what that means: no tail control, no stability. In a few seconds, the B-17 should spin into a death dive. But somehow, the All-American stays airborne. The crew can hardly believe it. Through sheer luck, or maybe something more, the airflow is holding the shattered tail section just enough in line to keep the bomber flying. Anderson looks over the gauges, then at the horizon ahead. He knows the odds. This aircraft shouldn't be in the sky. It shouldn't even exist anymore. Radio, he calls out. Get me a fix on our position. We're turning back. The radio operator hesitates. Sir, you sure? We might not make it. Anderson's voice is steel. We'll make it. Nobody's dying up here today. The crippled B-17 begins its long, impossible journey home, a flying corpse limping through the frozen sky. The bomber shudders violently as Anderson eases back on the throttle, trying to reduce airspeed without stalling. The tail section sways like a pendulum, its metal skin screeching as the wind claws through the ruptured fuselage. Every second in the air feels like a gamble. One wrong move and the tail could shear off completely, sending them spiraling into the abyss. Easy now, hold her steady, Anderson mutters through clenched teeth. His gloved hands fight the yoke, each motion answered with sluggish resistance. Behind him, the waist gunners stare through the gaping hole where the rear fuselage used to be. The view is horrifying. Daylight pours in through twisted beams of aluminum, the floor half gone, cables hanging like snapped nerves. Beyond that, the tail section trembles, held only by a few structural spars and fragments of the aircraft's skin. I can see daylight through the floor, one gunner shouts. We're gonna come apart. The co-pilot, Burbridge, leans toward Anderson. If that tail goes, Bud, we're finished. She'll snap like a twig. Anderson doesn't look away from the horizon. Then we don't let her go. He knows that at this altitude, bailing out isn't an option. The crew would freeze or be cut down by German fighters. The only chance they have, however slim, is to keep the All-American in the sky until they reach Allied lines. The radio crackles to life. This is the All-American, the operator transmits. We've sustained severe damage. Tail section almost completely detached. Requesting emergency escort and coordinates for friendly territory. There's static, then a faint reply, copy that, All-American. God help you. Hold tight. For the next few minutes, time stretches thin. The flak fades as they exit the target zone, but the real battle has just begun. Temperatures dropping fast, the engineer reports. Cabin pressure's gone. We're losing oxygen. Anderson nods. Everyone on masks. They're flying at 20,000 feet now, too low for flak, but still high enough that every breath without oxygen burns like fire. The frost creeping across the inside of the cockpit windows makes the world look ghostly, unreal. Tail gunner, report, Anderson says into the intercom. Static answers him. Then, a weak, trembling voice. Still here, but I can see sky through the floor, Lieutenant. The whole section's shaking apart. Anderson exchanges a glance with Burbridge. If the tail rips off, he doesn't stand a chance. Burbridge's voice is grim. Should I tell him to bail out? Anderson shakes his head. If he jumps, the shift in weight might tear us in half. Nobody moves. The radio operator looks back toward the rear, eyes wide. That tail's hanging on by a prayer. But somehow, the prayer is holding. Below them, the broken cities of northern Germany slide by, shrouded in smoke and ruin. The engines drone, a haunting, uneven rhythm. One of them spits black oil, another vibrates with a metallic whine. After nearly 30 minutes of white-knuckled flying, the horizon begins to shift, the edge of occupied France. "Navigator," Anderson calls, "how far to the channel?" 80 miles, maybe 90. At this rate, another hour. An hour. 90 minutes of flight in a plane that should have disintegrated 20 minutes ago. Burbridge exhales hard. "You think she'll hold together that long?" Anderson's eyes narrow. "She doesn't have to hold together forever. Just long enough." The bomber's shadow flickers over farmlands and forests, its silhouette visibly distorted, a flying fortress that looks half destroyed, limping through enemy skies. Inside, the men are silent. No more jokes, no more chatter. Just the grinding of metal and the distant echo of the wind. Then, faintly, the call comes through the intercom. "Fighters. 2 o'clock low." Anderson curses under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." 2 German FW-190s climb toward them from below, sleek and deadly against the clouds. The B-17 can't maneuver, one wrong turn, and the tail will rip clean off. They're defenseless. "Keep the formation tight," Anderson says quickly. "Gunners, do what you can." The waist gunners brace themselves, firing short bursts. The tracers streak through the air, but the fighters are faster, darting in and out like sharks circling wounded prey. Come on," Anderson whispers, glancing at the fuel gauges. Just then, salvation comes from above, 3 P-47 Thunderbolts diving out of the sun, guns blazing. Their .50 caliber rounds shred through one of the FW-190s, sending it spiraling into smoke. The second turns hard and vanishes into the clouds. The radio crackles again. "You boys look like hell down there. Let's get you home." Anderson allows himself a faint smile. "Gladly." The escorts fall into position, one on each wing. The sight is a comfort, American fighters standing guard over their broken brother. Still, the journey isn't over. Every mile home feels like a lifetime, every vibration a threat. The engineer keeps his eyes on the instruments, reporting every fluctuation in oil pressure, every flicker in the engines. 40 miles to go, the navigator calls. But the All-American is weakening. The tail section now oscillates wildly, visible even from the cockpit. The sound of bending metal fills the air. "Hold together, girl," Anderson murmurs, almost as if speaking to the plane itself. "Just a little longer." And as if hearing him, the old bomber obeys. Through the haze of clouds, the English Channel finally appears, a cold silver line on the horizon. They've made it out of Germany. But whether they can land is another question entirely. The channel stretches below them like a mirror of steel, its surface rippling with whitecaps. The sun is beginning to sink, staining the clouds gold and crimson, beautiful, but deceptive. Beauty has no place in this war-torn sky. Inside the cockpit of the All-American, the tension is suffocating. Every man aboard knows they've crossed out of German airspace, but safety is still a distant dream. The tail section continues to groan and twist, the metal skin flexing with every gust of wind. "Keep her steady, Bud," Burbridge says quietly, his voice strained but steady. "I'm trying," Anderson replies, hands locked on the yoke. "She's fighting me every inch." The control column feels alive, twitching, trembling, sometimes completely unresponsive. The elevator cables had been shredded in the explosion, only fragments of control remain. Anderson has learned to fly her by instinct, using engine thrust and the slightest aileron adjustments to coax the damaged bomber along. The crew watches in disbelief. They're witnessing a miracle, a B-17 split nearly in half, staying airborne purely through willpower and pilot skill. The engineer wipes the frost from his goggles and shouts, "Oil pressure's falling on number 2. It's running hot." "Feather it," Anderson orders. "We can't afford to lose her completely." Burbridge glances sideways. "That'll drop our lift even more." "You sure?" Anderson nods grimly. We're already halfway home. I'll take less power over another explosion. The engine sputters, coughs, then winds down. The asymmetrical thrust drags the bomber to the right, forcing Anderson to fight the controls again. She's going, he mutters. Come on, girl, hold it together. In the waist section, the gunners cling to the fuselage beams, their boots planted inches from the open air. Through the ragged hole where the rear floor used to be, they can see the channel below, a dizzying sight that sends chills through every man. One of them, Sergeant Joe McNeil, mutters a quiet prayer. Just get us to the coast, Lord. That's all I ask. The tail gunner, Sam Tabor, still manning what's left of his turret, adds softly, ain't much tail left to ride on. From his shattered position, Tabor can see straight down through the gaping holes in the fuselage. The tail section sways rhythmically, up, down, side to side, each movement threatening to tear it free. The structural spars connecting it to the main body groan like bending bones. He radios forward, Lieutenant, tail's breaking loose. She's coming apart. Anderson takes a breath. He can't show fear. Hold on, Sam. We're almost there. He leans into the intercom again. Navigator, how far to base? 30 miles inland once we cross the coast. RAF base at Bizzer Hills expecting us. I already radioed ahead, they're clearing the runway. Burbridge exhales, rubbing his temples. If we make it that far. The P-47 escorts stay close, their pilots exchanging hand signals through the glass. One of them radios, all American, your tail's hanging by a thread. Looks like you're missing half the structure. Anderson responds through gritted teeth. Appreciate the observation. The fighter pilot chuckles grimly. You're holding a flying miracle together, Lieutenant. We'll stay with you to the ground. The bomber limps onward, the English coastline finally rising into view, chalk-white cliffs and rolling green fields. The sight hits the crew like a shot of adrenaline. There it is. England, the bombardier cries, slapping the side of the fuselage. We're gonna make it. But Anderson doesn't celebrate yet. The most dangerous part is still ahead, landing. The B-17 was never designed to land with half its tail missing. Every engineer who later studied this flight said it was aerodynamically impossible. With the rear so compromised, the slightest pitch could send the bomber into an uncontrollable dive. Anderson studies the gauges. Airspeed, 150 knots. Altitude, 5,000 feet and descending. The engine strain as he adjusts power, compensating for the missing lift. All right, crew, he says through the intercom, calm and measured. We're going in slow and steady. Get ready for a rough one. The radio operator nods, though Anderson can't see him. Roger that, sir. I'll make sure the medics are waiting. As they near the base, the control tower's voice breaks through the static. All American, this is Bizzer Hill Tower. You're cleared to land. We've got emergency crews on standby. Godspeed. Anderson glances at Burbridge. Here we go. The field comes into view, long, flat, dotted with flashing signal lights. It looks like salvation. But as Anderson begins his descent, the bomber lurches violently, the tail dips hard. Warning lights flash across the panel. Tails breaking loose. Burbridge yells. Anderson fights the yoke, muscles straining. No. Not now. The plane wobbles dangerously. The tail flutters like a flag in the slipstream. One of the stabilizers peels away, spinning off into the distance. Hold her together, he shouts. Come on, hold. The airspeed drops. 130. 120. 110. The runway is seconds away. The bomber screams over the perimeter fence, barely clearing it. The landing gear slams down, locking with a metallic thunk. Flaps. Anderson calls. Flaps down. The B-17 hits the runway hard, bouncing once, then twice, before the wheels finally bite. The entire fuselage shakes. Sparks trail from beneath the wings as metal scrapes against the tarmac. For a few heart-stopping moments, no one breathes. The bomber slides, wobbles, then finally slows to a grinding halt. The tail section, impossibly, is still attached. Silence. Then, as the engines spool down and the vibration fades, a single cheer erupts from the crew, then another, and another, until the entire plane is filled with the sound of laughing, shouting, disbelieving men. They had done the impossible. Anderson leans back, his hands trembling on the yoke. "We're home," he whispers. "We actually made it." Outside, ground crews rush toward the battered aircraft, and stop dead in their tracks. They stare, open-mouthed, at the sight before them, a B-17 that looks like it's been sawed in half, still standing on its landing gear. Even the engineers can't explain it. The structural integrity should have failed long before they crossed the channel. By all accounts, the All-American should have fallen from the sky. But somehow, through a mix of sheer willpower, physics-defying luck, and unbreakable teamwork, it didn't. And from that day forward, the story of the All-American became legend, a tale whispered across airbases and briefing rooms as proof that sometimes, in war, miracles really do fly. When the engines finally wound down and the last propeller blade slowed to a stop, a strange silence fell over the airfield. Mechanics, medics, and fellow airmen who had gathered along the tarmac stood in stunned disbelief. Before them sat the All-American, a machine that should not, by any measure of engineering, physics, or reason, have been capable of flight. The tail section sagged under its own weight, barely clinging to the fuselage. Jagged tears ran along the midsection where the 20mm shell had detonated. Wiring hung like tendrils, swaying in the evening wind. The skin of the aircraft had peeled back in places, exposing raw structure and shredded cables. One ground crewman whispered, "How the hell did this thing stay in the air?" The co-pilot, Lieutenant Ralph Burbridge, stepped out onto the wing, his knees weak from the ordeal. He could hardly believe he was standing on solid ground. Behind him, one by one, the rest of the crew emerged, pale, trembling, eyes wide. They looked like men who had climbed out of a grave. The tail gunner, Sam Tabor, had to be helped down from the rear of the plane. He'd stayed in his position the entire flight, refusing to abandon post even as the tail section threatened to break free at any second. His face was ghostly, his uniform stiff with frost and oil, but he managed a tired grin. "Guess she held together after all." Lieutenant Anderson was the last to leave the cockpit. As his boots hit the tarmac, a group of RAF officers and U.S. Army Air Corps engineers rushed forward, still unable to process what they were seeing. One of them, a major from the maintenance division, walked a slow circle around the aircraft, his mouth hanging open. "This thing should have torn itself apart the moment you lost your elevators," he muttered. "You didn't land this, you balanced it." Anderson managed a faint smile, though his voice was hoarse. "She did most of the work. I just kept her honest." The engineer crouched near the rear fuselage, inspecting the damage. "Good God, the tail's connected by 3 inches of skin and a handful of control cables. That's it." A reporter from Stars and Stripes, who had been waiting for returning bombers, was there too. His camera clicked furiously as he circled the wreck. This is something else. You boys just made history." The next morning, photos of the All-American spread across Allied bases. Airmen gathered around bulletin boards, staring at the images in awe, the B-17 with its tail nearly severed, yet sitting proudly on the runway like a symbol of defiance. Some called it the ghost ship that refused to die. Others called it the flying miracle. But for Anderson and his crew, the memory was less about legend and more about survival, the sound of tearing metal, the the freezing wind roaring through the fuselage, the silent prayers whispered over enemy skies. In the weeks that followed, the engineers at the base conducted a full inspection. Their findings shocked even Boeing's design team. The tail had been held in place by a single spar and remnants of the elevator cables. Aerodynamically, the aircraft had no reason to remain stable. The airflow around the broken structure should have caused uncontrollable oscillation, yet somehow, Anderson's steady hands and split-second instincts kept it flying level for over an hour and a half. When the engineers presented their report, one colonel reportedly shook his head and said, "If this story wasn't documented with photos, nobody would have believed it." Lieutenant Anderson and his crew received commendations for their extraordinary airmanship and courage under impossible conditions. But true to form, Anderson downplayed the heroics. "We were just trying to get home," he said in an interview. Any crew would have done the same. The All-American was retired soon after. Too damaged to repair, it was stripped for parts, its frame too fragile to ever fly again. Yet the legend of that day, April 8, 1943, would live on long after the aluminum had corroded and the engines had gone silent. Years later, when aviation historians revisited the mission, they used the photographs and reports as a case study in structural resilience and emergency flight control. The event became required reading in Air Force training manuals, a lesson not just in aerodynamics, but in human determination. The men of the All-American went on to fly other missions, but none ever forgot the day they cheated death in a bomber that should have fallen from the sky. In a letter written years later, Anderson reflected on that flight. "Every man aboard that plane had a job, and not one of them gave up, not when the tail tore off, not when the fighters came, not when we were sure we'd go down. A bomber is just metal and rivets, but what keeps her in the air, that's the crew." And maybe that's why the All-American stayed airborne, not by the laws of physics, but by something far stronger: faith, courage, and an unbreakable bond between the men who refused to let each other fall.